Your paycheck is a jar of beer and 10 loaves of bread. You did not choose this job. You were born into it. And you will die in it with your teeth ground down to stumps by the sand baked into every loaf you ever ate. That last part is true even if you are Pharaoh. For roughly 3,000 years, from the unification of the Nile Valley around 3100 BCE to the day Cleopatra's kingdom became a Roman province, ancient Egypt ran on grain. Not gold, not silver, not coins of any kind. Coins would not arrive until the very end, carried by Persians and Greeks. For 2.5 millennia before that, the most sophisticated civilization on the planet paid its workers in bread and beer, recorded every jar and every loaf on limestone chips and papyrus rolls, and kept the whole system running longer than any political order in human history. And we can read their records. That is the part that changes everything. This is not guesswork. This is not myth stitched together from fragments. Thousands of administrative documents, attendance sheets, wage receipts, complaint letters, even excuse notes for missed work survive in museums from Cairo to London to Turin. What they reveal is a society that was simultaneously more humane and more brutal than anything Hollywood ever showed you. But brutal in ways you do not expect, and humane in ways that will stop you cold. So consider this a walk through that society, from the lowest rung to the highest. 7 ranks, 7 lives. One question threaded through all of them. What did it actually feel like to be a person in ancient Egypt? Not a symbol, not a movie, extra. A person with a body that wore out, a family that needed feeding, and a paycheck measured in beer. Start at the bottom. The word slave does not translate cleanly into ancient Egyptian, and this matters. The Egyptian terms hem and bak cover a range that runs from war captive to household servant to debt laborer, and Egyptologists have spent decades arguing about where servitude ended and slavery began. What is not debated is that prisoners of war, brought back from campaigns in Nubia and the Levant, could be bought, sold, and inherited. A New Kingdom papyrus records the sale of a Syrian girl for a price paid in silver and textiles. She had a name once. The papyrus did not preserve it. If you were born into the lowest tier of Egyptian labor, your body told the story before any document could. Grinding grain was among the most physically destructive tasks in the ancient world. Picture the posture. You kneel on packed earth, leaning forward over a curved stone slab, pushing a heavy grinding stone back and forth, hour after hour, day after day, year after year. The rotary quern had not been invented yet. Everything was ground by hand. Skeletal remains of women who performed this work show severe arthritis in the knees, the spine, and the arms by the age of 30. Archaeologists could identify a grain grinder's occupation from the bones alone, before they found a single artifact beside the body, a skeleton that speaks its own biography. That is Egyptian evidence, and the bread those bones produced was rough. Stone grit from the grinding process saturated every loaf. It wore teeth down to the root. Dental abscesses were epidemic across every social class in Egypt, but the poorest ate the grittiest bread, and their mouths paid first. Now step up one level to the tier that held 80 to 90% of the population. The peasant farmer. Your life follows the river. 3 seasons, dictated by the Nile. Akhet, the inundation when the fields vanish under brown floodwater from July to November. Pharaoh, the growing season. Shemu, the harvest. You do not choose when to plant. The river chooses. You do not choose when to rest. The state chooses. Because during the flood months, when your fields are underwater and you cannot farm, you owe your labor to the pharaoh. This is corvée, a tax paid with your body. You dig canals, you haul stone, you build. This is the labor force that raised the pyramids, and it was not slave labor. It was compulsory, yes. Unpaid, no. The state fed you. Bread, beer, onions. And here is where the record demolishes the myth you grew up with. Mark Leonard's excavations at the workers' village near the Giza Plateau, ongoing since the late 1980s, found something that reframed 3,000 years of assumption. The pyramid builders ate beef, sheep, goat, regular animal protein in quantities that, according to the archaeological analysis, exceeded what many working-class Egyptians eat today. The state that demanded their labor understood a principle that has apparently eluded some modern employers. Starving workers do not lift 2-ton blocks. Work gangs left graffiti on the stones, not the desperate scratchings of the oppressed. Organizational names, team names, friends of Khufu, drunkards of Menkaure. These are people who identified with their crews. That does not sound like slavery. It sounds like something more complicated and more human. But the farmer's life was not gentle. Tax assessors arrived after every harvest. Tomb paintings from the 18th dynasty show the scene with painful clarity. A scribe with a reed pen and palette stands beside your field. Behind him, a man with a stick. A measuring rope stretches across your land. They are calculating what you owe. If you cannot pay, the stick is not decorative. This, too, is depicted. The anxiety of audit, it turns out, is older than money itself. If you have ever wondered what it would feel like to have your future measured by a man with a rope and a calculator, while another man stands behind him holding a club, you now understand tax season in the 18th dynasty. Now, the artisans. And this is where the dossier of ancient Egypt opens so wide, it takes your breath. Deir el-Medina, a small village on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes, tucked into the desert hills near the Valley of the Kings. The workers who lived here carved and painted the royal tombs, and they are the single most documented working community in the entire ancient world. Not the most documented in Egypt, the most documented anywhere, before the modern era. Thousands of ostraca, limestone flakes covered in ink, survive from this one village. Wage records, attendance sheets, love poems, medical complaints, laundry lists. Literally laundry lists. A senior workman at Deir el-Medina during the Ramesside period earned roughly 5.5 car of emmer wheat and 2 car of barley per month. 1 car is about 76 liters of grain. On top of that came regular deliveries of fish, vegetables, water, firewood, pottery, and on good months, meat and wine. This is not subsistence. This is a middle-class wage, denominated in grain. They worked 8 days on, 2 days off, in a 10-day week. They received additional days off for religious festivals. And here is the detail that earns its own silence. The attendance records survive. On limestone chips, in faded ink, a foreman recorded why each man was absent. Pendua was absent because his wife was menstruating, which was a matter of ritual purity. Another worker missed his shift because he was brewing beer. Another because a scorpion stung him. Another because he was embalming his mother. Someone wrote these excuses down on a chip of limestone 3,200 years ago, and we can still read them. And the most extraordinary entry in the labor record of this village is this. Around 1152 BCE, during the reign of Ramesses III, the grain rations stopped coming. 18 days passed. The workers had done the work. The state owed the bread. So the tomb builders of the Valley of the Kings downed their tools, crossed the boundary walls of the royal necropolis, marched to the mortuary temples, and refused to go back until they were paid. This is documented in the Turin Strike Papyrus. It is the oldest recorded labor strike in human history, and it was not about freedom or philosophy. It was about a paycheck, 18 days late. The rations were eventually delivered. 3,000 years before the concept of a labor union existed, Egyptian craftsmen understood that a contract is a contract. If you left a comment right now about which of these details surprised you most, from the pyramid builder's beef to the scorpion sick day, I suspect the answers would split right down the middle. That itself tells you something about what this civilization was. Now step into the tier that changed everything, the scribe. A Middle Kingdom text called the Satire of the Trades survived in so many copies that Egyptologists are certain it was used as a school exercise for centuries. A father is bringing his son to scribal school, and to motivate the boy, he describes every other profession in Egypt in the most miserable terms he can manage. The washerman, he says, cleans the clothes of a woman in menstruation and weeps, spending the day at the washboard. The fisherman works on the river, mingled with crocodiles. The potter is smeared in clay. The soldier is beaten and marched until he collapses. The scribe, by contrast, sits, writes, thinks. And here is the practical detail that made scribal training the most valuable investment a family could make. A scribe was exempt from corvée labor. In a civilization where every illiterate person owed weeks or months of backbreaking physical work to the state every year, learning to read was not self-improvement. It was a survival strategy. Literacy did not just open doors. It exempted your body from the tax that broke other bodies down. Estimates of Egyptian literacy hover around 1% of the population, possibly higher in urban centers. The training began in boyhood, perhaps as young as 5 or 7, and lasted roughly 12 years. The tools were austere. A wooden palette about the length of your forearm with 2 small wells, one for black carbon ink and one for red ochre. A few reed pens. A water pot. The scribe sat cross-legged on the ground, papyrus stretched across the knees. No desk, no chair. Just read on papyrus, the sound of wet ink drying in desert air, and the knowledge that this skill would protect you from the quarry, the field, and the measuring rope. Above the scribe stood the priest, and this is where modern assumptions collapse entirely. An Egyptian priest was not a spiritual counselor. He was a service technician for the gods. His job was to perform the daily rituals that kept the divine residents of the temple fed, clothed, and satisfied. Because in Egyptian theology, if the gods were not maintained, the cosmos itself would unravel. The word for priest, hemnetcher, means servant of the god, not leader, servant. Many priests served in rotation, 1 month on, 3 months off. During their off months, they held other jobs. The priesthood was a shift, not a calling. But during their month of service, the requirements were absolute. According to Herodotus, writing around 440 BCE, Egyptian priests shaved their entire bodies every other day, head to eyebrows to legs. They wore only white linen. Wool was ritually impure. They bathed twice daily in cold water and abstained from sexual contact for the duration. Herodotus was a Greek outsider and not always reliable, but temple inscriptions partially confirm the purity regime. Imagine shaving your entire body every 48 hours, bathing in cold Nile water before dawn, and then spending the day inside a dim granite corridor performing rites for a statue that you believe is genuinely alive. And the institution behind you was not small. Papyrus Harris I, the longest surviving papyrus from ancient Egypt, compiled around 1151 BCE, records the holdings of the Temple of Amun at Karnak during the reign of Ramesses III. The numbers are staggering. even if partially inflated by royal accounting. Over 80,000 employees, over 400,000 head of cattle, hundreds of gardens, dozens of boats, 65 villages. The Temple of Amun was not a church. It was a corporation on a scale that would make a modern conglomerate pause. A senior priest at Karnak was not praying. He was administering an empire. Above the priest, one more step before the throne, the vizier, the chati, the highest-ranking non-royal official in Egypt, combining the roles of prime minister, chief justice, and head of civil administration. During the New Kingdom, there were usually two, one for Upper Egypt and one for Lower Egypt. The job description survives. Carved into the walls of the tomb of Rekhmir, a vizier of the 18th dynasty, around 1425 BCE, the text known as the Installation of the Vizier lays out his duties with a specificity that reads like a modern executive contract. Hear all legal cases, manage land surveys, control the treasury, dispatch military orders, receive foreign envoys, ensure the palace gates open and close on time. And through it all, a principle carved in stone. Show no favoritism. The great shall not be preferred over the small. Whether the ideal matched reality is a fair question, but the fact that they carved it means they wanted it said, and they wanted every future vizier to read it on the wall and understand. This office is not a reward. It is a weight. The penalty for failure was not retirement. A chancellor named Bey, who accumulated extraordinary power under the child pharaoh Siptah near the end of the 19th dynasty, was eventually executed. An ostracon from Deir el-Medina records the event in 5 blunt words. The great enemy Bey was killed. Stone remembers. And now the top, the pharaoh, per-ah. The word originally meant great house, a reference to the palace, not the person. The title attached to the body only gradually, a linguistic shift that tells you something about how Egyptians thought about power. The institution came first. The person filled it. You might think the pharaoh was the freest person in Egypt. He was the most imprisoned. Theologically, the pharaoh was the sole intermediary between humanity and the gods. Every temple ritual in Egypt was performed, in theory, by him. Every sunrise required his participation. Every flood was his responsibility. Drought, plague, military defeat. These were not policy failures. They were cosmic ones, evidence that the pharaoh's relationship with Ma'at, the divine order, had fractured. His body was not spared. Ramesses II, perhaps the most famous pharaoh of all, lived into his late 80s or early 90s, an almost unimaginable age for the era. His mummy tells the cost: severe dental abscesses, a spine bent by arthritis, arteriosclerosis hardening his arteries. A Lancet study from 2013, examining mummies across 4 ancient cultures, found arterial calcification in Egyptian royals consistent with chronic cardiovascular disease. The royal diet was rich: bread and beer and beef and honey and wine. And the bread, even the pharaoh's bread, contained the same stone grit that destroyed every other Egyptian's teeth. Sand in the bread. Even the king's bread. The great equalizer was geology. And after 30 years on the throne, the most powerful human being in the known world faced a test no modern president or king would survive. The Sed Festival, Heb-Sed, a ritual of renewal in which the aging pharaoh had to run a physical course between boundary markers in public before the assembled court and priesthood to prove he was still fit to hold the throne. This was not symbolic. Temple reliefs show the king actually running. His theological legitimacy depended on his legs. Picture it. An old man, wrapped in white linen, standing at one marker in the ceremonial courtyard. The priests are watching. the court is watching. The gods, he believes, are watching. And he has to run. Not fast, perhaps, but he has to finish. Because if the king cannot finish, the cosmic order he embodies has a crack in it. And 3,000 years of theological architecture offers no provision for what happens next. The loneliest sprint in the ancient world. This is what the progression reveals. Each step up the ladder brought more food, more linen, more authority, and more weight on the body and the soul. The slave ground grain until her skeleton recorded her suffering. The farmer owed his body to the state every flood season. The artisan earned a decent wage but could lose it if the bureaucracy failed. The scribe bought freedom from labor with 12 years of education. The priest shaved his body and served the gods in cold pre-dawn water. The vizier carried the legal conscience of a civilization on his shoulders. And the pharaoh, at the very top, carried the universe. More power did not mean more freedom. It meant more obligation. That inversion is the deepest thing the Egyptian record teaches about hierarchy. It is also, if you sit with it, a quiet indictment of every modern system that pretends power flows only one way. 3,000 years of continuous civilization, paid for in bread and beer, recorded on limestone and papyrus, preserved in dry sand and museum glass. The names survive. The wages survive. The sick days survive. The strike survives. The dental abscesses survive. And in all of it, not mystery, but clarity. Specific people, doing specific work for specific pay, leaving specific records that we can still, after everything, read. The next time you hold a paycheck, or file a tax return, or call in sick, or argue with your employer about what you are owed, know that a tomb builder named Pendua did something very similar on a Tuesday in 1150 BCE. He just got paid in beer. If this is the kind of history that makes you want to know more, the kind built from evidence rather than legend, there is more ahead. The Egyptian record is vast, and we have barely opened the first room.